This is the FM Gold channel of All India Radio. In the program News Analysis, now we bring you a discussion on Indo-ASEAN Summit. The participants are A.N. Ram, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, Foreign Affairs Editor. The Statesman.
We are discussing the 11th India-ASEAN Summit, which recently concluded in Brunei and which was attended by Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh. My first question is, how would you rate the significance of India being a member, being a part of regional organizations like ASEAN? How is it helping India in its Look East policy as India tries to develop better relations with its neighborhood?
The Look East policy actually is much bigger and broader than our very close and purposeful relations with ASEAN. Today a new expression has come into use, and the expression is Indo-Pacific. The area between India and Japan and Korea in the north, that entire Pacific Ocean area as well as the joining areas in India comprise this large space. ASEAN is the core of our Look East policy. Our relations with the 10 members of the ASEAN date back to hundreds and thousands of years. But more recently, from 1992, we have developed institutionalized links with ASEAN. Every year in the ASEAN Summit, which is also attended by full dialogue partners, a separate meeting is held between the 10-member Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, and India, along with, of course, other meetings which they hold with countries like China and others. So at that meeting, the roadmap for future cooperation, the state of our relations, is all gone over. In this particular meeting, the significance is that India's relations with ASEAN have acquired the critical mass. 2 decades are over and have now reached a state where we have to now look to expand this relationship, not only to include the all-important economic aspects, but also to cover strategic aspects, political aspects, cultural aspects, connectivity aspects, which the Prime Minister has emphasized. We have separately free trade agreements with individual countries, not only in the ASEAN bloc, but also with countries like Japan, Korea, and a number of other countries. So all this are building blocks of what the Prime Minister conceives as the Asian Economic Community. So I would like to believe that at this meeting, this summit in Brunei, India's main interest would have been, and perhaps it is because some reports have come in about the agreements which have been reached between India and ASEAN, is A, to consolidate our economic linkages and connectivity, B, to expand the area of our cooperation to include strategic aspects. The agreement which has been reached reportedly on setting up a group to coordinate activities in the maritime field is a landmark agreement which probably will translate itself into a kind of an agreement which will enable us to protect our interests in the international waters, in the high seas, and in friendly countries which India has very close relations. Separately, we are also participating not as members but as observers in the Asian Defence Ministers meeting, which is an institution which has been set up by the ASEAN to cover defence aspects of our relations. Then there are the cultural aspects, the connectivity aspects. We are now building a road which will take us directly from India via Myanmar into Thailand and beyond up to Vietnam, maybe a rail network. This summit meeting was significant because A, the Prime Minister's blueprint has been fully accepted, proposed blueprint for future action, and B, because I think we have got satisfaction on issues in which India was deeply interested: connectivity and economics apart, strategic, defense, political, cultural, and connectivity links.
Whenever there is talk of ASEAN, the talk also kind of focuses on presence of China in the grouping. And there's always this talk of India and China competing for influence in the neighborhood via ASEAN. Would you agree with that analysis?
I don't believe that is so. That is not my take. My understanding is that India has always said that there is enough space, not only in the ASEAN region, in the Asia Pacific, but in the globe, for India and China to coexist and to promote their national interests. I think the ASEAN space is really a space in which India and China should come together, not only for their cooperation with the ASEAN member countries, but in order to make sure that their own interests, which is of course beyond their borders, is also adequately met through cooperation rather through a policy of confrontation. Yes, I know that there is considerable worry in the ASEAN countries over some doubts in their minds about China's lengthening shadows, particularly in the context of this Spratleys Islands dispute, now Senkaku Islands dispute with Japan, and Chinese claims on certain territories which the concerned ASEAN countries consider to be their own. So the South China Sea, the East China Sea is now becoming a zone of kind of misunderstanding and conflict, largely because China's assertiveness in that sector has grown. But India believes that all aspects of such disputes should be settled peacefully through dialogue, and in any case, all international aspects of this issue, namely freedom of navigation, freedom of passage, of commercial passage, freedom of movement, etc., should be dealt with as a part of the international law which already prevails and which prescribes that international waters shall remain fully navigable for peaceful purposes, for commercial purposes, for purposes of transit of goods and services. And in other words, what I'm trying to suggest is that the doubts of the ASEAN countries, which I'm sure were discussed this time during their summit meeting with the Chinese leadership, are something which India believes need to be resolved amicably and peacefully.
There have also been suggestions that India's role in ASEAN might be used in a good manner to balance out the effect of China. Would you say that's a practical way of looking at things, India balancing out China in ASEAN?
Our policy has always been that we don't believe in containment. There is now this new American policy, Pivot Asia. The Americans are in fact now coming into Asia in a new incarnation. The Pivot Asia policy seeks to create the red lines for China so that China does not transgress those red lines prescribed largely by the Americans, which they hope with the help of the concerned Southeast Asian countries and Asia-Pacific countries. Even commercially, the Americans are now coming forward with a proposal on Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, which should in fact have such far-reaching consequences for all the arrangements that we are discussing, economic and commercial arrangements. Some countries of the Southeast Asian region are already committed to joining the TPP, whereas others have not yet made up their minds. China, for example, has not yet decided to. China, in fact, from all indications, is not inclined to support this proposal. India is also looking at what the prospects might be, either by being a part of it or by being separate, by making separate arrangements with the Southeast Asia Pacific countries. So the whole matrix in the region of Asia Pacific is undergoing a very, very momentous transformation, not only strategically and politically, but also commercially and economically. The landscape is likely to look different in a few years' time. India's effort is to make sure that in this changing landscape, our interests are not behind. And I think so far our diplomacy has managed to take care of our national interests, to safeguard our national interests, both in the commercial as well as in the strategic domain, as well as in the defense domain, I would like to add. So the point about China is that while India does not believe in the policy of containment, which maybe some other countries do believe, because India does believe that there is enough space for India and China to cooperate in this region and to build bridges of friendship rather than confrontation.
There were some interesting reports in the international media that ASEAN this year would actually be an area where the United States and China would also be competing for influence in the Asia region. As you rightly pointed out about the US and its emergence or its re-emergence into Asia, do you feel there is a certain fear that the US might try and assert itself more in Asia? And China also wants to do that, so we might see some kind of a confrontation. And within that confrontation, where does India fit in?
You are very right. There is already a very subtle kind of a rivalry, confrontation, which is evident, which is discernible. I'm not suggesting that this is an active confrontation or active rivalry which is in place, but policies are being put in place which will make sure the new American policy of Pivot Asia, President Obama's policy, will certainly create a new partnership for America in the Asia-Pacific region. The partnership will include strategic aspects, political aspects, cultural aspects, indeed commercial aspects. TPP is a part of that. Whereas the Chinese feel that they have a historical role to play in this region. They have already made it clear that they would like to challenge any effort which is being made by any country to keep them out of the Asia-Pacific space, which they consider is their own. India looks at all this with a certain degree of shall we say, hope that these things don't translate into areas of rivalry and conflict. India does believe that the Asia Pacific, which holds the key to the prosperity of the world in this century and beyond, will be an area of peace, of cooperation, and that is why the Prime Minister's proposal for an Asian Economic Community, so that we all work together to optimize our collective advantages, is so important. Perhaps to answer your question in a word, I would like to say that India believes that the Asia Pacific region should be an area of peace. The ASEAN, which is the core of the Asia Pacific, has already made it clear that they have a very distinct way of looking at things. India, feels that we have great empathy with the ASEAN way of doing things, and therefore our cooperation with the ASEAN countries is growing so successfully.
Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh also made a very important announcement. He said that India would be appointing an ambassador in residence in Indonesia, especially for ASEAN. How significant this announcement, and how far do you think this will further the relationship between India and ASEAN?
I think this is a very important step. It's a step which has been in the making for the last few years. Don't forget, India has an ambassador to the European Union in Brussels. Likewise, if India has an ambassador to ASEAN whose headquarters are located in Jakarta, then perhaps it will enable India to focus at the macro level with ASEAN rather than at the bilateral level, which in any case reinforces the macro level partnership. There is a Secretary General in the ASEAN Secretariat who is based in Indonesia. And the ASEAN Secretariat in Indonesia will be like the European Commission in Brussels, which our ambassador in Brussels deals with on macro matters. So I think it is a very important step. It's a good step, and perhaps India is one of the first few countries to proceed in this direction. I think we should welcome this development.
Would you then say that India's attempts to become part of regional organizations like SAARC, like ASEAN, is in itself a significant step forward in India's foreign policy movement, where we are engaging more and more with the neighborhood, with the world at large, and this is a kind of a fulfillment of India's role where it seeks a greater role on the global stage?
Look East is integral to, Look East policy is integral to now our national interest, core interest, to our foreign policy interests. While India is a participant in the process of evolving closer links and relations with the Asia Pacific, India is not a member of ASEAN. India is a full dialogue partner of ASEAN. India has summit-level dialogue relations with ASEAN, but India is not an insider. The 10 ASEAN members are what constitute ASEAN, and perhaps that is the core of the Asia Pacific. As I said earlier, the East Asia Summit, for which Prime Minister also attended a meeting in Brunei, is again a regional organization which represents our collective thinking and interest on regional issues concerning the Asia Pacific. We are now pretty advanced in developing linkages with regional bodies, regional organizations. With EU also we have a free trade agreement. We have a strategic partnership with ASEAN, we have a strategic partnership with EU. Likewise, we have links with the Gulf Cooperation Council, with the Pacific Council, with the NAFTA, with Mercosur in Southern America and the South, with SADC in Africa. So we have such linkages with other regional organizations also, because let us not straitjacket India into any single regional grouping. We are a global player, increasingly so, and I think we have to look global. Look East policy is a part of that global outreach which India is seeking to achieve.
And with this, we bring the discussion to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on Indo-ASEAN Summit. The participants were A.N. Ram, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, Foreign Affairs Editor, The Statesman. It came to you in the program News Analysis, produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.nic.in. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.